months, causing large spikes in the price of many African staple foods like rice, maize and wheat. Now, the surge has led to requests for emergency food aid in some countries. In others, citizens have rioted in the streets. Now, to discuss this, we are joined in our Pretoria studios by Dr Tobias Takavarasha, the representative of the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations in South Africa. Doctor, good morning to you and welcome to AM News.
Good morning. Thank you.
Now, Doctor, with the spiraling food prices globally out of control, what does this mean really for Africa's food security?
The biggest threat to Africa's food security, apart from the general availability of food, is volatile and spiraling food prices, which limit the accessibility of the general population to food, especially those who depend on food that is purchased from the shelves for their food security. So I can say it's a major worry. High food prices are a major concern as far as the achievement and sustainability of food security is concerned.
Now, what are the major contributors for these ever-rising prices in food?
Food prices are affected adversely by high input costs. If you have a situation of high cost of fertilizer, high cost of fuel, high cost of labor, and other costs that affect the availability and the distribution of food, that leads to high prices. In addition to that, where there is declining productivity and a declining availability of food, which is failing to meet demand, then that translates into high food prices. So there are issues that we monitor regularly to see what are the major areas that are causing food prices to rise and what interventions can be put in place.
Now, this high input cost that you're talking about, how much pressure does that problem put on Africa's agricultural sector then?
It does put a lot of pressure because on the one hand, we are saying in order to increase productivity in agriculture, you would have to apply fertilizer, you would have to use improved seed varieties, and you would also have to improve mechanization, which requires you to use fuel to distribute that food. So indeed, high food prices, if we cannot contain high input costs, we would have difficulty in containing high food prices.
Is there anything that governments can do, Doctor, to really cushion poor consumers from this ever increase in prices?
There are three basic things that governments can do to cushion food consumers from high food prices. The first thing is to improve the general availability of food, be it food that is imported, food that is produced locally, and enable and support those smallholder farmers in the vulnerable areas to be able to produce their own food. The second thing that can be done, of course, is to enhance access to food through the income that a person earns through employment. So where there is improvement in employment and employment creation, you are increasing the chances of a family to have access to food. But the third and most important mechanism is social protection safety nets, which come in the way of grants or direct food distribution to vulnerable people. So governments are addressing all those three areas to ensure that you can at least cushion a majority of the population from the effects of high food price on food security.
Now, Doctor, which countries in Africa are most affected by this phenomenon?
Traditionally, we have always known in Africa that countries that suffer from chronic weather conditions, such as the Sahel region, and those that have suffered from prolonged and protracted conflicts, such as the Horn of Africa, are countries that traditionally have experienced difficulties in meeting their food security needs. But we also have situations in a number of countries where economic factors, such as declining in employment or declining economic performance, result in the accessibility of food being challenged. So we can actually say that in a number of African countries, the magnitude would differ because of the ability and capacities of other countries to cushion their consumers. But in a number of countries, there are still pockets of unemployment, pockets of food insecurity, which governments are battling with.
Mm-hmm. Now, how do we as the African continent then compare with our counterparts and, with these challenges regarding high food prices?
Regrettably, Africa seems to be on the receiving end of high food prices for the simple fact that some countries depend on their basic food needs on imported food. Therefore, they would import the high costs if that food is landing at a higher cost. The second factor is that Africa is also the country that is still experiencing the lowest level of productivity. Our fertilizer application rates are as low as 8 kilograms per hectare compared to 120 kilograms per hectare in other countries. We still have a lot of our land not used to irrigation. So we are still having opportunities that are not being exploited to achieve food security. So our statistics show that of the 842 million people globally who are estimated to be facing food insecurity, about a third of those are on the African continent.
Now, there has been a call, Doctor, for request for emergency food aid on the continent. But how much food reserves does the Food and Agricultural Organization and the World Food Programme have to help the hardest hit countries here in Africa?
In fact, what these two UN agencies do is not so much to hold the food reserves, but to facilitate the accessibility of food. In the case of the FAO, their mandate is to eradicate food insecurity, hunger, and poverty by promoting sustainable agricultural production, while the World Food Programme works to support emergency relief. And when they do so, they procure on per need basis. So the task of these agencies is to monitor the availability, to monitor areas that require emergency relief so that they are able to intervene. So they don't necessarily hold stocks themselves, but they know where the stocks are, they know where the food is to be procured, and they know where the emergency relief distribution is expected to take place.
Now, you gave us 3 solutions there, Doctor, but finally, what is your message out there to the world in order to make sure that we do not face food security, or insecurity rather, on the continent?
My message is that 2014 is declared by the African Union the year of agriculture and food security, and heads of states and government this coming week will be meeting in Malabo, in which agriculture and food security is high on the agenda. So my message is that let us, as Africa, accelerate the policies, the programs, and the projects that have already been agreed upon that require funding and implementation so that we can address food insecurity once and for all. That is my message.
Thank you, Doctor, for your time.
Thank you.
That was from our Pretoria studios, Dr. Tobias Takavarasha, the representative of the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations here in South Africa.